Hello everyone, I'm Jessica Santascoy and I'm with Astronomers Without Borders, also known as AWB.
And I am Daniela De Paulis, chair of the AstroArts program for Astronomers Without Borders, and we are going to talk about Jon Lomberg's art.
Welcome to everyone listening, and thanks to our guests who are part of the show. They're doing it out of their passion for astronomy and Jon Lomberg's work.
Jon Lomberg has created many historic works, including the Galaxy Garden in Kona, Hawaii, a large-scale explorable model of the Milky Way galaxy. In 1977, he was design director of NASA's famous Voyager Interstellar record. Keith Cooper is a science writer and editor of Astronomy Now in the UK, and also editor of Principium, the publication of the Institute for Interstellar Studies. Dr. Kimberly Jameson is a cognitive scientist at the University of California, Irvine. She conducts research at the Institute for Mathematical Behavioral Sciences on color and perception. She's the editor of a section in the Encyclopedia of Color Science and Technology.
So, Jon, you've worked on a lot of historic projects, but let's start with the Galaxy Garden, which is one of your most recent projects. Could you describe it to the audience?
Well, the best way for the audience to get a sense is to go to our website, galaxygarden.net, which has a lot of pictures. But everyone is familiar with models of the solar system, a big ball for the sun and little balls for the planets spread out at the right distance. Very effective way of teaching people the geography of the solar system. Well, I did it for the galaxy. It's the first time it's been done for the galaxy. It's a 100-foot or 30-meter diameter flower garden, where the plants are planted in the shapes of the spiral arms, and there's a lot of mapping of actual objects in the garden. At that scale, if you look at one of the leaves, and we have plants where the leaves are covered with little yellow dots, if you imagine those are the stars, when you look up at the sky at night and you see all the stars, you're looking at pretty much our leaf and the neighboring leaves. It's a very small part of a very large object. It's a hard concept for people to get, but in the garden, because the scale is at their own perception level, they can see 5 orders of magnitude difference between how far apart the dots on the leaves are and how big the garden is. It really telegraphs the scale of the galaxy like nothing else that I've seen. It's in Kona, Hawaii, and it's been open for 5.5 years. It's still the only one in the world, but I'm highly motivated to assist anybody who wants to try to build another one.
Great. Can you talk a little bit about how you chose the plants?
Well, I should say, people sometimes ask me, how long did it take you to do this? And the answer really is my whole life, because I had built up a long history of trying to deal with the galaxy as a topic for art. Have done it in many media, and in a way it was all leading up to this. One of the kernels from which it grew was a painting I did called Star Flowers, which makes a visual metaphor between flowers and star-forming regions in the galaxy, these beautifully colored nebulae we've all seen pictures of. They always look like flowers to me. And in a way, a flower makes seeds, that makes more flowers, that makes more seeds. There's that reproductive cycle. The way stars are formed out of these clouds of gas, they live their lives, the gas goes back to the galaxy, it makes new stars. There's almost that biological cycle to it. So having the model of the galaxy as a living model actually more accurately reproduces what's happening in the real galaxy. So what I had to do was, once I started with flowers representing nebulae, is with my collaborator, a genius gardener here named Barbara DeFranco, we chose plants and flowers that would stand in for the stars, for the dust and gas, for the globular clusters, for the different kinds of nebulae in a kind of a key. And again, on our website, there are maps and charts that show all of the flowers and what they represent.
Kimberly, can you talk about color as communication in Jon's work?
Certainly. Colors communication is interesting because in our world, across a wide range of species that are found in nature, color signaling or color displaying and the ability to perceive color differences have evolved as the basis for communicating useful information. So in nature, just like in Jon's garden, such color communication codes are used for a wide range of purposes, and this occurs within species, such as signaling health and reproductive fitness, or in deciding on which mates you prefer, or dominance interactions, and so on. And then across species, color signaling is also seen, for example, between deciduous trees and insects, flowers and pollinating birds and insects, and mammals and edible food, and so on. Color, as we normally think of it as humans, is, of course, another example of a signaling system in which, for communication purposes strictly, a color name signals a color appearance. But in all these cases, the color communication coding system that is understood by the sender and the receiver is an evolved and highly specific code, and in most cases, it's largely idiosyncratic and species-specific. So color as a communication method can be used as a type of a messaging or an information code, but a lot of care is needed to ensure that, first, the definition of the code is made very clear, in other words, that it's defined before it's actually used, and second, that the code itself does not depend on any idiosyncratic processing aspects of the sender or the receiver's environments or their perceptual features. This is the kind of idea that the Voyager Interstellar record aimed to achieve, and when they use the solar spectrum as part of their messaging design. And Jon can speak about more of that.
Okay.
I've worked with Kimberly and other cognitive psychologists for many years, and I think any visual artist can really benefit by discussion and some study of the work of Kimberly and her colleagues, because how we see, most people have this very naive view that, well, we just see what's there, and the eye is kind of like a passive recording system, and it's nothing like that at all. It's a very complicated perceptual eye-brain system that filters out a lot of things and can vary so much. One thing maybe Kimberly could talk about a little bit, just to give an idea of how our naive views of color are really not how it really works, is that the number of words for different colors varies from language to language. And you'd think that everybody would name the same colors, but they don't. There's an enormous variation. Maybe Kimberly, you could explain that a little bit, because I just find that so fascinating.
Sure. I mean, I think this is interesting because, for example, the tag Astronomers Without Borders is especially fascinating to me because it turns out that color categories are entirely culturally dependent. So if you're going to be assigning color temperatures to stars that are not based on the physical Planck scale, but are based on your observing the star through with your natural viewing apparatus, your eye, then a star that's slightly red or one that's blue could have different color designations depending upon who the astronomer is and what nation he or she stems from. So in Russian, there's two terms for blue that are widely used, Sini and Goluboy, and they would translate exactly, well, roughly glossed into our language as a dark blue and light blue. But any astronomer who's a native speaker of English would not quite understand the distinction that's being made by a Russian astronomer, even though their mental map of the naming system or the color code is as robust as the English-speaking category for blue. And there are very, very many examples like this across color space. So that speaks to the issue that when we articulate things about color temperatures, and color stars, there are borders, and astronomers need to be aware of that and make sure that that's reflected in their characterization of their observations.
Kimberly, I have one question about your passion for the relationship between color and astronomy and art. This is a little bit beyond your field of research, I guess, as a psychologist. How did you get so fascinated by it?
Well, my interest in color has to do with kind of comparative color experience. So the question is kind of a philosophical one, because when I observe a red apple, is it the same internal experience as when Jon Lomberg observed a red apple? And this, of course, can be extended, to great lengths. I mean, does a honeybee experience the same type of perceptual experience that I have when the honeybee looks at the red apple, and so on and so forth? And it's kind of at the root of an interesting philosophical question about internal qualia. And the reason I gravitated toward the astronomical art issue is because the question on how you might use colors in, for example, designing a message for an extraterrestrial intelligence, so an intelligence that has consciousness, maybe a little bit like us, or like a honeybee or like a mammal, how would you use color in the design of one such message? And this is an issue that Jon Lomberg and I have collaborated on and written paper on and given talks on, and it's one that's a very interesting thought exercise that has a lot of interesting features to it that bring in both color, art representation of data, and astronomical features.
Okay, thank you. Keith, I'd like to ask you whether, going back to the Galaxy Garden, how is the Galaxy Garden important for the field of interstellar studies?
Well, I think one of the things that a lot of members of the public don't realise is how big the galaxy is and how big the universe is. John mentioned the solar system scale models with the planets all spaced out in scale, showing how big the solar system is. But the galaxy is many orders of magnitude bigger, and a lot of people don't realise that. I mean, astronomers flippantly throw around terms, a light year, 10 light years, 100,000 light years. And I think a lot of people don't really comprehend those distance scales. I think a lot of astronomers probably don't as well. It's nothing on this Earth that we can conceive. The Earth is a 12,000 kilometer wide sphere. The galaxy is immense in comparison. So I think in terms of interstellar studies, both in terms of studying distant planets and stars and nebulae, and also in terms of one day maybe perhaps sending probes to other stars and things, it's important to realize, how far away the other stars are and what an achievement it would be to be able to send a probe to, say, Alpha Centauri, that's just 4.2 light years away. And in John's Galaxy Garden, it's sharing a leaf with the CERN. So it's a sense of scale that I think people don't really realize until, they would step into the garden and see for themselves.
Great, thanks. John, how is the Galaxy Garden important to the astronomy community?
Well, I want to pick up a little bit on what Keith was just saying, and then also I think it ties in with what Kimberly was saying, that, how can I express this? You can have a concept that's totally abstract in your mind. The galaxy is 100,000 light years across. Each light year is about 6 trillion miles, and they are quantitative facts that can be written down. But then we also experience the universe through our perceptions, and that's a completely different kind of experience. And when we try to communicate experience, maybe one of the distinctions between an artist's view and a scientist's view is a scientist is usually more interested in that abstract concept. Give me a number that's the size of the galaxy. Don't say it's huge. That's how you feel about it. But what's the number? Another way of communicating is by communicating our perceptions, and that's what artists do. And sometimes these two ways of conceiving things complement each other. Sometimes they're actually very, very counterintuitive. I'll give you just one example from astronomy. The Hubble and other observatories have in the last 20 years released image after image of nebulae and objects in space in these gorgeous psychedelic colors. These colors have nothing to do with what you would see if you were there. In fact, what I found as somebody who participates in public stargazing activities, that when people look at how a nebula really looks to your eye in the telescope, which is like a faint cloud, there's no color in it at all. It's a very diffuse object, and I don't think, no matter where you were in relation to a nebula, you'd ever see color in it. So that's how it really is to your perceptual system, but the way the astronomers have been releasing it is completely at odds with that. So it creates a kind of a dissonance. People don't know what to make of the fact that they see pictures of nebulae which have been colored, often for scientific reasons, to make different structures more easy to see and to separate. But what they've done is communicate a concept which is really at odds with the reality of it. One of the nice things about a galaxy garden, one of the nice things about a metaphor is if you know it's a metaphor, you don't get confused like that. Like, people can look at brilliantly colored flowers and they represent the nebulae, but they know it's a flower, so maybe the color is confined to the flower part, not the nebula part. What I'm saying is that with the Hubble pictures, they're released as if this is the real thing. There's very little disclaimer. These colors have nothing to do with what you really see, or even what colors, what wavelengths these objects are emitting. So reality is presented in a way that's very misleading. If you present things as a metaphor, though, I think in some ways people know it's a metaphor and you avoid that. And I think one of the virtues of the Galaxy Garden is that by being a garden, and being a very pretty garden, it invites people in and kind of puts people in a more receptive mood to take in the information. And I think that the key thing is that people who deal in visuals need to be mindful and intentional of understanding what using a certain color is going to imply. And I think a lot of artists do this kind of unconsciously, kind of intuitively, know how you manipulate the colors in a painting will draw the attention of the viewer in certain ways that you want. And it's kind of like a good camera work in a movie. When it's done well, it's invisible. You're not realizing that there's a camera there. But when it's done poorly, you're suddenly aware of the camera bouncing and being unpleasant to your eyes. So I guess the common thing is just you have to be aware of the implications of anything you put in a visual.
Daniela, how does the Galaxy Garden fit in with other Earth art that's been done?
Well, the Galaxy Garden belongs to a long tradition of art, which is called land art. The land art movement started in the late 60s, and the term was coined by a very famous American artist called Robert Smithson, who, amongst other works, made the spiral jetty. The aim of the land art movement was that of creating artworks outside the museum and art galleries, and using natural materials such as stone and plants. So the land art movement is a very important movement in the 70s and 80s. But I think what's really interesting about Jon Lomberg's work, and especially the Galaxy Garden and the Voyager records, is that he is making a land art for the 21st century. So whereas in the past we saw land art made on Earth, Jon is thinking about the land which is outside the Earth as well, so including the galaxy and the cosmos. If we think about the Voyager records, these works are incredibly pioneering. No artist before had such a visionary idea of sending an artwork into interstellar space. So the land art movement is moving, is developing, and every artist's work, of course, is connected to the history of art in a way or another. So I think all space artists are somehow linked to the land art movement, but they are looking at the future of Earth and space.
One of the things that I've sometimes thought, I think a lot about who might find the Voyager record, and if there are other intelligent beings in the galaxy. I'm sure there are or have been. Whether they're close or we'll ever contact them, I don't know. But what would their civilization like? If they had art, what would their art be like? Now, on the one hand, you could say our art comes from our perceptive apparatus, music from the way we hear, painting from the way we see. And another organism will have a completely different biology. Who knows what their perception will be like? So their art, might be incomprehensible to us. On the other hand, there are various commonalities or relations between aesthetics and physics. Two notes harmonize with one another have to do with the physics of sound. It's not a human artifact. Well, sometimes I try to think, what would the art on another planet be like? And the one thing I would think that we would have in common with them is that we're both in the galaxy. And it's just for them, like for us, an enormous concept, a hard concept, and a beautiful concept. So I imagine that galaxy gardens, or something like galaxy gardens, will be on every sufficiently advanced planet in the Milky Way. And I'd love to see how an artist from another planet, from another species, would make their large-scale explorable model of the galaxy.
Okay, Keith, so you recently had a retrospective article in January of this year in Principium about the Voyager. Can you tell us what is historic about Jon's contribution in Voyager and what he just talked about? If there is an extraterrestrial who comes into contact with this record, what would it be like?
Well, I found a quote from Carl Sagan that addressed this a little bit. He called the Voyager record a bottle. I guess he was thinking of one of those bottles that you put a note in and then you toss it into the ocean, it floats off and somebody else finds it. And he described it as saying something very hopeful about life on this planet. And I took that as meaning it was a statement that we, humanity, are here on Earth, and that we can persist, and that perhaps one day we'll follow Voyager out into interstellar space. Whether anybody's going to find it, I think it's probably more likely that humans will come across it than extraterrestrial life. Not because I don't think ET isn't out there, but it really is like looking for a needle in a haystack. It's more symbolic than and I think Jon would agree with this, it's more symbolic than a serious attempt to contact extraterrestrial life. And whether, if ET did find it, whether they would understand the record or whether it would be too parochial, I don't know. So I think that the Voyager record is important in the way of putting humanity. I guess it's a precursor to humanity becoming an interstellar civilization. That sounds a little bit science fiction, and perhaps it will be, perhaps we never will. But, right back from cavemen, we've always looked at the stars and wondered what's out there. And now Voyager 1 and 2, they're leaving the solar system soon, they're on the very edge. And soon they're going to leave the solar system and head out to the stars. Voyager 1 will go within 1.6 light years of a red dwarf star in about 40,000 years. So they're not going to go straight to any stars, but it's a first voyage out of the solar system. And I think it's symbolic in saying we're here, and one day we're going to join. If there's anybody else out there, we're going to join you out in the great galaxy.
I agree with everything Keith said. I think he summed it up perfectly. The one thing I'd say, though, is, of course, we knew when we were making the Voyager record that it was clearly a message to Earth, as much or more than a message to extraterrestrials, because nobody knows what the chances are of it being found, but it's probably very slim chances. Nevertheless, I decided if we were going to do it, let's take it seriously. I mean, if it was a purely symbolic message, we could have just written something in English, okay. But we really wanted to approach it, if it were found, the 1 in a zillion chance it's found, what materials would be understandable? How could they be presented in a way that would facilitate easier understanding? And doing this brought up these issues in color, though it wasn't till years later when I was working with Kimberly that I kind of understood how tricky these issues really are.
Kimberly, can you please explain how colors in art can be relevant in the search for extraterrestrial life?
Sure. I mean, I can add to what Jon just said by saying that the general challenge in designing a SETI message is to find ways to translate the structure of human internal experience into the types of internal experiences that we would expect might be possible to occur in ETI. And for the case of color, this is a real challenge. And there's a reason for it, and the reason is, very briefly in a nutshell, that color is observer dependent, and color is both starlight dependent and atmospheric filtering dependent. And for these reasons, when we design a message for an extraterrestrial intelligence and we use a mode like color, we have to realize that color is subjective. It's not out there in the environment to detect in the same way that a solid physical object might be. And so for these reasons, we need to be, as Jon said, mindful of the way that the translations will change across species and across observers from different, different environments, different planets altogether. The part about the observer being different, if you want an example, I don't know if you do, but here on Earth, a honeybee, a bear, or a bird, and a human can have similar access to the physical attributes of, for example, a tree in the forest. And each of these species can interact in their own ways with that tree's object features. But when that earthly tree is bathed in sunlight, it's going to give rise to very different color experiences across these 4 species. So the detection of environmental color is really much more an interpretation of information than it is the detection of actual physical object properties. And depending upon which star is illuminating the object, you will change the perceptions across these species as well as across species from different planets. And depending upon whether or not the object is filtered through the Earth's atmosphere in a magnetosphere or out in deep space, or from the filtering of Mars's or Venus's thin atmospheres, this will also change the internal perceptual experiences of the 4 earthly organisms I mentioned, as well as those from observers of other planets. So the challenge in designing a SETI message that uses color is to, like I said earlier, make sure that you find ways to translate the structure of our internal experience of color into the internal experience of structures that may occur or may be possible in ETI. And we can do this because this is the kind of thing we do when we model comparative color perception across terrestrial species. But it does not tell us necessarily what the internal experience of those other species are, or even what the experience of an ETI would be.
Here's a great example of something that people don't think about, but when you do, you go, hey, imagine you have an apple, and you have the apple, and you have it in a dark, dimly lit room. You take it into a more brightly lit room. You take it into sunlight. Now, in any sort of objective measurement, the color coming off that completely changes. But humans will see it the same color, will recognize that it's the same object under different lighting, and even see it and imagine it the same color. When their actual perceptual experience is, it's very different, but because we know it's the same object, we kind of adjust to keep the color experience the same. The other thing is, people say sometimes that the most important benefit of the space program so far was being able to look back at Earth. And, stepping outside yourself and looking at yourself from an observer's point of view gives you a whole different perception. It's no accident that the environmental movement really got going when we saw that the Earth was a finite, bounded planet. And I think that when we start talking about these issues of how would the universe appear to an extraterrestrial, in order to answer those questions, what it really does is it teaches us, or at least it's taught me, a lot more about how we view it, and realizing that that's just one of, possibly infinite ways of apprehending and conceiving the universe around you.
So, Jon, in light of all the current technological and artistic developments, the stuff that Kimberly's talking about, would you change anything about the Golden Record if you were producing it now?
Interesting question. What I also find interesting is that there is a spacecraft that's also going to leave the solar system, New Horizons. It'll get to Pluto in a few years and then exit. And I thought that it would have some, quantum nano version of the Voyager record, taking advantage of new technology and things like that. But it doesn't carry any message. And I asked some of the scientists working on it, why not? And they said, well, we knew we could, but it was just so hard to do. And nobody really wanted to take the responsibility and the time involved into thinking up what to do. It's not easy. It's hard. I view that as a missed opportunity, but I think it also, in retrospect, I guess it kind of makes it incredible that the Voyager record ever happened at all. Especially happened in the ridiculously short time period of 6 weeks from here's the challenge to here it is to put on the spacecraft. In retrospect, I just think, especially as I've had more experience with NASA and with how slowly things move, that we were able to get it done at all. I always run across pictures. I think, that would have been a great Voyager picture. And then I think of things that we didn't include, and I thought, how could we have missed putting in a picture of the pyramids, for example? One of many things that's not there. On the other hand, if you look at information recording technology, the main difference between now and then is it's a digital world now. It was an analog world then, and the Voyager record is an analog recording device where the message is the grooves in the record, and as long as the record stays physically intact, that message does not degrade. On the other hand, all of the media that we have developed to store digital information are much more perishable, much more ephemeral. CDs are incredibly fragile compared to vinyl LPs. And whether it's a CD or a flash drive or a hard disk, or these things don't last very long. So I don't know what new technology you could use that would be better than what we did before. The only thing I can think of is nanotechnology. If you were going to inscribe a plaque, you could just get a fantastic amount of information on it by inscribing it at nanoscales. But other than that, I don't know what the next version of the Voyager record should be.
Okay, Keith, would you add anything different to the golden record, or Kimberly? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I remember having a conversation with Seth Shostak at the SETI Institute, and we were talking about communicating with extraterrestrial intelligence, and I asked him what he would send, and he said he would just upload the entire internet into a radio telescope and just beam all that out into space. And I kind of thought that's too easy, because I think the value of SETI, because we're talking about aliens and what extraterrestrial life would perceive of the universe around them, and we really don't know. We're guessing. And at the end of the day, with SETI, we're learning more about ourselves than we are about aliens. And I think that's the true value in SETI for the moment, until we do discover an extraterrestrial signal. And obviously, with modern technology, as John was saying, we could include an awful lot more. But Seth Shostak's idea of just beaming the whole internet into space was too easy for me, because there was no element of having to choose things, having to study our history and our culture and pick things of value. And I think that is one of the important points about the Voyager record is okay, they missed things out like the pyramids, but they had to consider what is important about life on Earth, that we would want extraterrestrial life or humanity in the future when they come across the Voyager spacecraft. What do we think is important to show other people? And my worry with having more included on a future version of the Voyager record would be that we lose that element of carefully choosing the most important aspects of humanity.
So to follow up on that, I think that one possible advance since the Voyager Interstellar record was designed would be to include some information from the Human Genome Project. I know that one aspect of DNA science that was included on the Voyager Interstellar record was a double helix, a symbolic representation of the double helix. But I don't believe that at that time there was any information on the human genome. And it might be interesting, since it's strictly quantitative and it's easy to dump this kind of data into a record with little symbolic representation, it might be interesting to include something like that in addition to some information about species variation and perhaps some examples of a couple species from the planet. That's just one possible idea of what might additionally be included in another record if one was to be developed.
Actually, I just read that they say the DNA of Arthur C. Clarke, I don't know what they're using as the source, but some specimen that contains his DNA is going to be put on a NASA solar sail kind of spacecraft as a tribute to Clarke. So you don't have to confine it to the information. You can send actual DNA. They've extracted DNA from insects trapped in amber, tens of millions of years old. So I think that proves that the DNA can survive long-term storage. So we might actually send samples of Earth's DNA in future messages.
Yeah, good idea.
John, one question about the scale you work with. Your work has been seen by a billion people, and you make art pieces that last a billion of years. Can you please talk a little bit about that?
Well, being seen by a billion people, almost any Hollywood movie gets seen by a billion people, so that's not... I think that's more a testament in how widespread our information net goes to everywhere in the world. And I was working with Carl Sagan, who was so popular and successful in all media that anything in his projects was seen by a billion people. I guess one of the things working in this field, after a while, you're not impressed sheerly by scale. people always tell me that the universe makes them feel so insignificant. It's so big. Well, isn't the world big? I mean, I can't conceive of the size of the world, really, but the fact that the world is big doesn't make me feel insignificant. Or the fact that, there are, billions of other people doesn't make my children seem less, unique and treasured. So just the fact that there are big numbers, I think when you work with them, after a while, you just stop being impressed by the bigness of the number, because there's some perspectives where 1 billion years is not very long at all. So of course it's wonderful having the chance to have done these projects. I've been so fortunate in being at the right place at the right time and having the chance to participate. And I feel good about Voyager. I mean, whatever else I do in my life, Voyager is the thing that's going to last the longest.
Jon, but in terms of outreach, we're talking about how many people have seen your art. They also see it on the internet, and I gather that you do outreach and you've worked with school groups. So do you see your artwork making an impact in that area of outreach?
Well, I have to say that I do. Whenever I speak, people come up to me and say that it was Cosmos or some of the other collaborations that I did with Carl that inspired them to become scientists, or at least to become interested in science. So I definitely think that the work in Cosmos that I and the other, Don Davis and Rick Sternbach and Adolf Schaller and other very talented artists contributed to, I think set an image of space for a generation of what it looks like, and maybe more importantly, how it makes us feel. And I think that space represents the most optimistic of all the possible futures. I mean, most impressions of the future are nightmares. The planet is poisoned, and there are plagues, and the computers have taken over, and robots are out to kill us, and people live violent lives amid the ruins of civilization, and kind of road warrior kind of world. That's the future. The only positive images of the future involve space, the Star Trek future. And I think that it's important to have a positive a goal, to have a sense that there is something that we can aspire to other than just watching the world fall apart all around us. So in that sense, I think that the work of all of us who try to do astronomy outreach is important, just for the perspective it offers and the hope that it provides.
Mm-hmm. I would also like to add to that from, if I may, from a pedagogical standpoint with respect to outreach. Jon's work is really quite important from the point of view of the veridical representation of complex concepts and scientific concepts in an artistic manner that permits people to comprehend difficult and sometimes very hairy types of relationships between quantitative entities. His depiction of the Milky Way galaxy on permanent exhibit at the National Air and Space Museum is a good example of a piece of artwork that was based upon data and depicted something that was out there that we wouldn't otherwise have been able to see in a visual way to allow us to understand scale and the kinds of things that Keith was talking about earlier with respect to the relationships of the individual stars and planets and clusters within that galaxy and their relationship to one another. So it's one of these things where you can look at a big data matrix of the spatial representation of the Milky Way galaxy, but you can't really get a visual picture of it until someone as experienced and skilled as Jon takes that data and turns it into a visual image. And then you can get a kind of aha experience And this is extremely valuable from a teaching standpoint because it allows young kids and teachers alike to just get their heads around a complex concept like what a galaxy is.
Yeah, well put. Good point. Keith, do you want to add anything on that point?
Yeah, just thinking about Jon's space art in particular, I think one of the things that marks Jon's art out as different to say, other space artists is he manages to infuse humanity into his art. And what I mean by that is if you look at his paintings, there's lots of imagery of human hands reaching up to the stars, or a human body with stars embodied within it. And a lot of other space art, even though it's very good, it shows alien planets and alien starscapes, and there's not a lot of humanity in there. And it sounds slightly new age-ish, but the old cliche that we are star stuff. Carl Sagan, made that point famous in his series Cosmos. But yeah, the atoms in our body come from the stars, and our future hopefully also lies in the stars. And Jon's art is able to illustrate that in a way that I think a lot of other artists don't. He merges human consciousness and human hopes with depictions of stars and galaxies, and shows that in the future maybe our exploration of the universe is going to be one that we hopefully do in person, or if not, then something that we can feel a part of the universe. I think a lot of people aren't able to relate to astronomy. It's talking about galaxies and planets that are so far away. So I think it's important to show that human element, and I think Jon does that very well.
Right, great point, because we really are made of star stuff, and once people can see that they are made up of the universe, then it makes a lot of difference. So does anyone want to add anything in general to the conversation before we sign off?
I just want to say thank you to everybody for the very nice things you've said about my artwork.
Thanks to you.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation. Thanks for joining us, and find out more about Astronomers Without Borders at astronomerswithoutborders.org.
And thanks to everyone, and we'll let you know when our next AstroArts Hangout will be.